You watch her pack her bags, and you genuinely cannot understand what happened. She says you never listen, but you remember every word of every conversation you've ever had. She says you don't care about her feelings, but you've spent countless hours trying to solve every problem she's mentioned. She says you're not present, but you're literally sitting right there, available, wanting to fix whatever is broken. And then she's gone, and you're left holding this confusion that feels like trying to solve an equation where someone changed the variables halfway through without telling you. You did everything you thought you were supposed to do. You were faithful, you provided, you tried your hardest to be a good partner. So why does this keep happening? Why do women who seem to love you eventually look at you with this exhaustion in their eyes, this resignation, like they've finally accepted that something fundamental is never going to change? Here's what nobody tells you about why women leave neurodivergent men. It's not because you're a bad person. It's not because you don't love her. It's not even because you don't try hard enough. Women leave neurodivergent men because there's a specific pattern of disconnection that builds over time, a type of loneliness that grows even when you're in the same room, and most neurodivergent men don't even know it's happening until it's too late. You think you're doing fine because you're meeting the explicit requirements. You're going to work, paying bills, showing up for scheduled events. But she's drowning in an invisible workload that you literally cannot see. And every time she tries to explain it, the conversation goes nowhere because you're both speaking different languages while using the same words. Let me break down what's actually happening in these relationships, because understanding this might be the difference between losing another person you love and actually building something that lasts. When a neurotypical woman enters a relationship with a neurodivergent man, there's usually this initial phase where your differences feel charming. Your intense focus on your interests seems passionate. Your direct communication style feels refreshing after dating men who play games. Your unique perspective on the world is fascinating. She's drawn to your authenticity, your intelligence, the way you see patterns nobody else notices. But somewhere around the 6-month to 2-year mark, something shifts. The things that seemed charming start feeling like obstacles. Your intense focus becomes you disappearing into your hobbies while she handles everything else. Your direct communication becomes you saying hurtful things without realizing it. Your unique perspective becomes you arguing about things that don't matter while missing things that do. And here's the critical part that most neurodivergent men miss. She doesn't suddenly stop loving you when this shift happens. The love is still there. What changes is her capacity to sustain the relationship without reciprocal effort in areas that matter to her. Neurotypical women are socialized to be relationship managers. They're taught from childhood to notice emotional undercurrents, manage social dynamics, remember important dates and details, maintain family connections, and keep the household running smoothly. These aren't innate female abilities. They're learned skills that take constant mental energy. And when a woman is in a relationship with a neurodivergent man, she often finds herself doing twice the relationship management because she's managing both her side and compensating for the areas where his neurology makes certain tasks significantly harder. Think about what this looks like in practice. She's remembering to buy birthday cards for both sets of parents. She's noticing when you've worn the same shirt 3 days in a row and gently suggesting laundry. She's tracking doctor appointments, car maintenance, when the dog needs vaccination boosters, when bills are due, when you promised your friend you'd help him move. She's translating social situations for you, smoothing over moments when you said something that came across wrong, managing her own hurt feelings when you forget plans or interrupt her, or don't notice she got her hair cut. She's creating structure and routine because she knows you function better with it, then feeling frustrated when you resist changes to that routine that she needs to make. She's initiating most conversations about the relationship, most physical intimacy, most social plans with other couples. And she's doing all of this while also working her own job, managing her own stress, and trying to maintain her own identity and interests. Now, here's where it gets complicated, and this is what most relationship advice completely misses. You're not deliberately making her do all this emotional labor. You're not sitting there thinking about how you can avoid responsibilities. In fact, you probably feel like you're trying really hard and still somehow getting it wrong. The problem is that your brain literally processes information differently, prioritizes differently, and notices different things. What's obvious to her is invisible to you. What seems urgent to her barely registers as important in your mental hierarchy. When she says she needs help with something, you hear the literal words, but miss the subtext about what that help actually looks like. When she's upset, you try to fix the practical problem instead of providing emotional support, because in your neurology, fixing problems is how you show love. You want to know the most painful part of this dynamic? She watches you hyper-focus for hours on your special interests, on video games, on research rabbit holes, on projects that fascinate you, and she sees the incredible capacity your brain has for sustained attention and detailed memory, and complex problem-solving. And then she asks you to please remember to take the trash out on Thursdays, something she's reminded you about for 2 years, and you forget again. She sees you recall obscure facts about topics you're interested in with perfect clarity, but you can't remember the story she told you 3 times about her stressful situation at work. You can spend 6 hours optimizing your video game strategy, but you can't spend 20 minutes having a conversation about her day without checking your phone or zoning out or steering the conversation back to your interests. And before you say it, yes, she knows it's not intentional. She knows your brain works differently, but knowing that intellectually doesn't stop it from hurting emotionally. It doesn't stop her from feeling fundamentally alone in the relationship. It doesn't stop her from wondering if she matters to you as much as your hobbies do. Because here's the brutal truth that nobody wants to say out loud. When your brain can clearly focus intensely on things that interest you, but consistently fails to focus on things that matter to her, it sends a message. The message isn't what you intend, but it's the message she receives anyway. And that message is that she's not interesting enough, not important enough, not valuable enough to hold your attention. If this is hitting hard right now, if you're recognizing patterns from your past relationships, hit that subscribe button because we're going deeper into this. And understanding these dynamics might be the most important thing you do for your future relationships. The comment section on videos like this fills up with men saying they finally understand why their marriage is ended, so drop a comment if this resonates with your experience. The breakdown usually happens in stages, and most neurodivergent men don't recognize the stages until they're looking back after the relationship ends. Stage 1 is what therapists call the accommodation phase. She's learning how you work. She's figuring out that you need direct requests instead of hints. She's discovering that you're not great with spontaneous plans. She's realizing that social events drain you, and she accommodates these needs because she loves you and wants the relationship to work. She starts being more direct. She plans things in advance. She handles more of the social coordination. She creates systems to help you remember important things. And for a while, this works. You feel understood. She feels like she's being a supportive partner. The relationship feels good. Stage 2 is the imbalance accumulation phase. The accommodations she's making start adding up. Each individual thing is small, manageable, not a big deal. But collectively, they represent a significant transfer of mental and emotional labor onto her shoulders. She's doing more planning, more remembering, more emotional processing, more social management. And because each individual accommodation seems reasonable, neither of you notices that the overall balance has shifted dramatically. You're not aware that she's carrying more because to you, everything feels normal. This is just how you've always functioned. You don't see the invisible work she's doing because it happens in the background of your awareness. Stage 3 is where the resentment starts building. She's been accommodating and managing and compensating for months or years now, and the reciprocity she expected hasn't materialized. She thought that once you understood what she needed, you'd start meeting those needs more consistently. She thought the systems she created would eventually become habits you maintained. She thought her direct communication would lead to lasting changes. But instead, she finds herself having the same conversations repeatedly. She's still reminding you about the same things. You're still forgetting important dates despite her creating calendar systems. You're still saying hurtful things without noticing the impact. You're still choosing your special interests over quality time with her more often than not. And this is where the fundamental neurological difference creates the most damage. When she brings up these issues, you often respond with explanations about your ADHD or autism or whatever your specific neurodivergence is. You explain that your brain works differently, that these things are genuinely hard for you, that you're trying your best. And all of that is true. But from her perspective, those explanations start feeling like excuses. Because she can see that your brain is capable of incredible things when you're motivated by interest. She watches you overcome significant challenges when something captures your attention. So when you tell her that remembering her birthday or listening to her without interrupting is just too hard for your brain, what she hears is that she's not worth the effort it would take to develop those skills. Let me be very clear about something here. This isn't about blaming you for having a neurodivergent brain. Your neurological differences are real. The challenges you face with executive function, working memory, attention regulation, and social cognition are legitimate. But here's the uncomfortable truth that you need to understand. Having an explanation for why something is difficult doesn't eliminate the impact of that difficulty on your partner. Your ADHD might explain why you forgot your anniversary, but it doesn't unforgot it. Your autism might explain why you don't naturally pick up on her emotional cues, but it doesn't make her feel less unseen. The reason for the behavior and the impact of the behavior are two separate things, and most neurodivergent men focus entirely on explaining the reason while never adequately addressing the impact. Women in relationships with neurodivergent men often describe this very specific type of loneliness. They say it's like being alone while someone is right next to you. They say it's like speaking into a void, where their words go out but nothing comes back that shows real comprehension. They describe putting enormous effort into understanding their partner's neurological differences, learning about ADHD or autism, reading books, listening to podcasts, adapting their communication style, only to feel like that effort is a one-way street. They're learning your language, but you're not learning theirs. They're accommodating your needs, but you're not building skills to meet theirs. They're carrying the relationship while you're focused on your interests. And here's what makes this particularly painful for both people involved. You often have no idea this is happening. In your mind, the relationship is going fine. You love her. You're faithful. You come home every day. You contribute financially. You show affection in the ways that make sense to you. When she tries to explain that she's unhappy, it genuinely confuses you because from your perspective, you're doing what you're supposed to do. The problem is that your perspective is missing about 60% of what actually makes a relationship functional. You're meeting the basic explicit requirements while failing at the implicit emotional connection that she needs to feel loved and valued. Let me give you a specific example that plays out in countless relationships. She comes home from a terrible day at work. Her boss criticized her unfairly in a meeting. She's upset and wants to talk about it. You're in the middle of something that has your attention, maybe a video game or a project or an article you're reading. She starts telling you about her day. You're half listening while still partially focused on what you were doing. You offer a solution. Maybe she should talk to HR, maybe she should document the criticism. Maybe she's overreacting and it wasn't as bad as she thinks. She gets more upset. You get confused because you just gave her helpful advice. She says you're not listening. You protest that you literally just responded to what she said. She says you don't understand. You ask her to explain what you're supposed to understand. She becomes frustrated and says, "Forget it." You feel attacked for trying to help. She feels alone with her emotions. Neither of you understands what just went wrong. What actually happened in that interaction? Your brain processed her story as a problem that needed a solution. That's how your neurology works. You identify problems and generate solutions. That's actually a valuable cognitive strength. But what she needed in that moment wasn't solutions. She needed emotional attunement. She needed you to pause what you were doing, give her your full attention, let her feel your presence and care, validate that the situation was unfair, and sit with her in the discomfort without trying to immediately fix it. This kind of emotional presence is extremely difficult for many neurodivergent brains. It requires shifting attention completely, processing emotional information instead of logical information, tolerating the discomfort of someone else's distress without taking action to resolve it, and maintaining that focus even when your brain wants to return to what you were doing. So you weren't being a bad partner in that interaction. You were trying to help using the tools your brain naturally reaches for. But the impact on her was that she felt dismissed, unheard, and emotionally abandoned. And that impact is what matters to the health of the relationship, regardless of your intentions. When this pattern repeats hundreds of times over the course of months and years, with her needing emotional attunement and you providing logical solutions, it creates this deep sense in her that you're fundamentally incompatible. Not because you're a bad person, but because the thing she needs most from a partner is something your brain finds extremely difficult to provide. Here's another pattern that destroys these relationships. The interest-based attention system that many neurodivergent brains operate on creates a very specific problem in romantic partnerships. Your brain allocates attention based on interest level, novelty, urgency, and importance to you personally. This works fine for many areas of life. It's probably why you're extremely good at certain things. But in a relationship, your partner needs consistent attention, even when providing that attention isn't particularly interesting or novel or urgent to you. She needs you to remember mundane details about her life. She needs you to engage in conversations about topics that don't fascinate you. She needs you to do boring household tasks without being reminded. She needs you to notice changes in her appearance or mood. She needs you to maintain connection during the routine, unexciting parts of daily life. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll recognize that your brain resists all of this. Routine tasks feel impossibly difficult. Conversations about everyday topics make you zone out. Remembering details that don't interest you feels like trying to hold water in your hands. None of this is your fault in terms of moral failing, but it's absolutely your responsibility in terms of relationship impact. Because what she experiences is that you can pay intense attention to your video games, your hobbies, your special interests, your Reddit threads, your YouTube videos, but you can't pay consistent attention to her. You can remember detailed information about subjects that fascinate you, but you can't remember that she has an important presentation on Thursday that she's been stressed about all week. If you've ever had a partner say something like, "I wish you cared about me as much as you care about your hobbies," this is what she's referring to. She's seeing the capacity your brain has for focus, memory, and dedication, and she's wondering why that capacity never seems to extend to her. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that it's not fair to compare your intense interests with the everyday aspects of a relationship. You're thinking that one is naturally stimulating to your brain while the other isn't, and you can't control what your brain finds engaging. And you're right about the neurology. But being right about the neurology doesn't change the fact that she's telling you she feels neglected and undervalued. And your response is essentially that your brain finds other things more interesting than maintaining connection with her. Let's talk about what happens in the bedroom, because this is another area where these dynamics play out in painful ways. Many neurodivergent men struggle with initiating physical intimacy, either because they don't naturally think about it, because they're uncomfortable with the ambiguity of nonverbal communication, or because they're satisfied with less frequent sex than their partner wants, so she ends up initiating most of the time. And maybe you respond positively when she initiates, so you think everything is fine. But she's noticing that you never seem to desire her enough to pursue her. She's noticing that physical affection only happens when she makes it happen. She's noticing that you're never the one creating romantic moments or expressing sexual interest. Over time, this creates deep insecurity for her. She starts wondering if you're attracted to her. She feels unwanted. She feels like she's imposing on you rather than being desired by you. And when she brings this up, you might respond with confusion because you do find her attractive and you do enjoy sex with her. But in her experience, attraction that never gets expressed through action doesn't feel like attraction. It feels like indifference. Your internal experience and her external experience of the relationship are completely different, and that gap destroys intimacy more effectively than almost anything else. The emotional regulation piece is another massive factor in why women leave neurodivergent men. Many neurodivergent people experience emotions more intensely and have more difficulty regulating those emotions, especially when stressed or overwhelmed. This often manifests as irritability, shutting down, emotional outbursts, or withdrawal. From the inside, you're dealing with genuine overwhelm. Your nervous system is dysregulated. You're doing your best to cope. But from her perspective, she's walking on eggshells trying not to trigger your stress response. She's managing her own emotions plus trying to manage yours. She's avoiding topics that might upset you. She's handling things herself rather than asking for your help, because asking often leads to you becoming overwhelmed. This creates a parent-child dynamic that kills attraction and breeds resentment. She feels like she's taking care of you emotionally, rather than being in a partnership with you. And the worst part is that you probably don't realize this is happening, because from your perspective, you're just managing your own stress the best you can. You're not asking her to manage your emotions, but she's doing it anyway, because the alternative is dealing with your dysregulation. Neither of you chose this dynamic consciously, but it's poison to the relationship. I know this is heavy. I know if you're a neurodivergent man watching this, you might be feeling defensive or hopeless or attacked right now. That's not the point. The point is understanding. If you can understand these patterns, you can start to make different choices. Drop a comment below if you're recognizing yourself in these patterns, because awareness is the first step toward change. Here's something else that happens in these relationships that nobody talks about: the trauma response that develops in women who partner with neurodivergent men. I'm not using trauma as hyperbole. I'm talking about actual nervous system dysregulation that develops from being in a relationship where your needs are consistently unmet, where your attempts to communicate those needs go nowhere, where you're doing the work of two people while feeling increasingly invisible. These women develop hypervigilance. They're constantly monitoring your mood, your stress level, your capacity, trying to predict what will overwhelm you so they can prevent it. They're scanning for problems, managing crises, filling gaps. Their nervous system never gets to fully relax because they're always in relationship management mode. They also develop this fawn response where they minimize their own needs, stop asking for things, make themselves smaller and smaller to avoid burdening you. They stop sharing when they're upset because your response to their upset is usually to become more upset yourself, or to withdraw, or to try to fix it in ways that don't help. They stop expecting you to remember important things because the disappointment hurts too much. They stop hoping you'll initiate romance or plan dates or show up emotionally because hope followed by disappointment is more painful than just having no expectations. And then one day, they realize they've become a shell of who they were, that they've contorted themselves into someone unrecognizable trying to make the relationship work, and they're done. When she finally leaves, it often seems sudden to you. She was fine last week. You had a normal conversation yesterday. You didn't have a big fight. But for her, this decision has been building for months or years. She's been trying to tell you in hundreds of small ways that she's drowning, but you couldn't hear it because the ways she was communicating weren't the ways your brain processes information. She's been hoping you'd change, working on herself, reading books, going to therapy, trying new communication approaches, giving you more chances. And finally, she accepts that the fundamental dynamic isn't going to shift, and she chooses herself. The tragedy is that many neurodivergent men are completely capable of being excellent partners when they understand specifically what's needed and commit to building those skills. Your brain absolutely can learn to set reminders for important dates. You can absolutely develop habits around checking in with your partner, You can absolutely practice giving your full attention during conversations. You can absolutely work with a therapist to improve your emotional regulation. You can absolutely learn to recognize when someone needs emotional support versus practical solutions. These things will always be harder for your brain than for a neurotypical brain, but hard doesn't mean impossible. The problem is that most neurodivergent men don't do this work until after the relationship ends. You don't truly understand what was needed until you're looking back at the wreckage. You think you were trying hard enough because you were trying as hard as you knew how, but you were missing the entire dimension of what she actually needed. And by the time you understand, she's already gone. She's already given you years of chances. She's already exhausted herself trying to teach you what she needed. She's already grieved the relationship while still in it. When she finally leaves, she's not leaving hoping you'll change. She's leaving because she's accepted that you won't. Let me tell you what women say when they're asked what they wish their neurodivergent ex-partners had understood. They say, "I wish he'd understood that explaining why something is hard for him doesn't make it hurt less for me." They say, "I wish he'd put as much energy into understanding my needs as he put into his special interests." They say, "I wish he'd taken my feedback seriously the first 10 times instead of waiting until I was done." They say, "I wish he'd recognized that I was drowning and thrown me a lifeline instead of explaining why he couldn't swim." They say, "I wish he'd understood that I needed a partner, not another person to take care of." They say, "I wish he'd cared enough to actually change, not just promise to change." And here's what makes this particularly devastating. Most of these men are genuinely good people. They're loyal, they're intelligent, they're capable of deep love. They're not abusive or cruel or malicious. They're trying their best within the limitations they're aware of. But trying your best isn't enough when your best is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what the relationship needs. It's like training really hard for a swimming competition when you're actually registered for a marathon. Your effort is real, but it's directed at the wrong things. So what does this mean if you're a neurodivergent man who wants to actually maintain a healthy relationship? It means you need to accept some uncomfortable truths. First, your neurological differences explain your challenges, but they don't excuse the impact of those challenges on your partner. You need to stop using your diagnosis as a reason why you can't change and start using it as a framework for understanding what you need to work on. Second, you need to accept that a relationship requires you to consistently do things that don't come naturally to your brain, and you need to build systems and get support to make that possible. Third, you need to understand that your partner's needs are just as important as yours, even when those needs don't make intuitive sense to you. You need to actively work on building skills in areas where your brain has deficits. That might mean working with a therapist who specializes in neurodivergence and relationships. That might mean using every technological tool available to remember important dates and tasks. That might mean setting phone reminders to check in with your partner. That might mean scheduling regular relationship meetings where you discuss what's working and what isn't. That might mean literally practicing giving your full attention during conversations until it becomes more automatic. That might mean learning to recognize when someone needs emotional support and training yourself to provide that even when your instinct is to problem solve. You also need to actually listen when your partner tells you what they need and believe them and make changes based on that feedback. Not explanations about why it's hard for you, not promises that you'll try, actual measurable changes in your behavior. If she tells you she needs you to initiate physical affection more often, you need to set reminders to do that until it becomes habit. If she tells you she needs you to do your share of household tasks without being asked, you need to create systems where you track and complete those tasks independently. If she tells you she needs you to remember important things about her life, you need to write them down, set reminders, review your notes regularly. This is going to feel unnatural. It's going to feel like you're faking it or being inauthentic. Your brain is going to resist because it doesn't naturally operate this way. But here's what you need to understand. Neurotypical people are also doing things that don't come completely naturally. They're managing their emotions even when they'd rather explode. They're remembering things they'd rather forget. They're having conversations about topics that bore them. They're doing tedious tasks they'd rather avoid. Everyone in a relationship has to do things that require effort and intention. The difference is that neurotypical brains find certain social and executive function tasks easier, so it looks effortless from the outside. But it's not effortless. It's just less difficult. You're not being asked to be someone you're not. You're being asked to develop skills in areas where your brain has weaknesses. Just like someone who struggles with math might need to work harder at balancing their checkbook, you need to work harder at the relationship management tasks that neurotypical people find more intuitive. That's not unfair. That's just reality. And if you want a relationship that lasts, if you want a partner who doesn't eventually leave from exhaustion and loneliness, you need to accept this reality and commit to doing the work. The alternative is continuing the same pattern. Meeting someone who's attracted to your unique qualities. Having a honeymoon period where differences feel exciting. Gradually watching her become exhausted as she takes on more and more of the relationship management. Having her try to explain what she needs while you explain why it's hard for you. Watching her slowly shut down as she accepts that her needs won't be met. Eventually having her leave, confused about what went wrong because from your perspective you were trying. And then repeating this same pattern with the next person, because you never actually addressed the underlying dynamics. You have to decide if you want to do this differently. Nobody can make you change. Your partner can't nag you into developing these skills. A therapist can't force you to do the work. You have to want it badly enough to push through the discomfort of operating against your natural tendencies. You have to want it badly enough to build and maintain systems even when they feel tedious. You have to want it badly enough to keep working on these skills even when you don't see immediate results. And you have to grieve the relationship model you thought you were going to have. A lot of neurodivergent men imagine that the right partner will just accept them as they are. That love means never having to change. That someone who truly cares will adapt to their neurological differences without asking them to adapt in return. That's not how relationships work for anyone. Everyone has to grow and change and compromise. Everyone has to do hard things to maintain connection. The specific things you need to work on might be different because of your neurology, but the requirement to work on things isn't different. Here's what's possible when a neurodivergent man actually commits to understanding these dynamics and building new skills. You can have a relationship where your partner feels seen, valued, and emotionally connected to you. You can have a relationship where the workload is genuinely shared instead of falling primarily on her shoulders. You can have a relationship where she trusts that you'll show up for her in the ways that matter. You can have a relationship where your neurological differences are accepted and accommodated without becoming an excuse for not growing. You can have a relationship where both people feel like they're in a true partnership. But getting there requires you to stop being defensive when she tells you what she needs. It requires you to stop explaining why things are hard and start figuring out how to do them anyway. It requires you to recognize that the impact of your behavior matters more than your intentions behind that behavior. It requires you to accept that you're going to have to work harder at certain aspects of relationships than neurotypical people do, and that's not unfair, it's just reality. It requires you to actually believe your partner when she tells you she's unhappy, instead of assuming she's overreacting or being too demanding. The women who leave neurodivergent men aren't giving up easily. They're not looking for perfection. They're not expecting you to magically become neurotypical. They're leaving because they gave everything they had to make it work, and it wasn't enough. And they finally chose to stop destroying themselves for a relationship that wasn't meeting their basic needs. They're leaving because they were lonely in the relationship, because they carried all the emotional labor, because they needed a partner and got someone who required parenting. They're leaving because they finally accepted that you weren't going to change, not because you couldn't, but because you wouldn't prioritize their needs enough to do the difficult work of developing new skills. And the heartbreaking thing is that often, after these relationships end, these men do start to understand what went wrong. They start to see the patterns they were blind to during the relationship. They start to recognize how their neurodivergent traits impacted their partner in ways they never understood while it was happening. They start to realize that she was telling them exactly what she needed, and they just couldn't hear it. But by then, she's moved on. She's healing from the relationship. She's rebuilding her sense of self. She's not interested in giving one more chance to someone who needed her to completely exhaust herself before he was willing to truly listen. So if you're in a relationship right now and you're recognizing these patterns, you have a choice. You can get defensive, explain why these observations don't apply to you, list all the ways you're trying, and continue doing what you've always done. Or you can sit with the discomfort of recognizing yourself in these descriptions. Accept that your partner's experience of the relationship is valid, even if it doesn't match your intentions, and commit to actually doing things differently. Not just promising to do better. Actually building new skills, creating new systems, changing your behavior in measurable ways, prioritizing her needs even when they don't align with your natural inclinations. This isn't about shame. This isn't about saying you're broken or defective. This is about understanding that your neurological differences create specific challenges in relationships, and those challenges won't disappear just because you have a diagnosis that explains them. The diagnosis gives you a framework for understanding yourself, but it's your responsibility to use that framework to build a life and relationships that work. Nobody else can do that for you. Your partner can't love you hard enough to make up for the skills you're not developing. She can't manage the relationship for both of you indefinitely without burning out. She can't keep hoping you'll change while watching you stay the same. The truth about why women leave neurodivergent men is that they leave when they finally accept that hoping for change is causing them more pain than leaving would cause. They leave when they recognize that they're not in a partnership, but rather in a caretaking role they never signed up for. They leave when they realize that the person they fell in love with isn't willing to do the work required to maintain a healthy adult relationship. They leave when their own self-preservation finally outweighs their love for you. And they leave knowing they gave you every opportunity to understand what was happening, every chance to make different choices, and you either couldn't or wouldn't do it until it was too late. You get to decide which story you want to be living 5 years from now. The story where you're alone again, confused about why another relationship failed, convinced that you just need to find someone who accepts you as you are. Or the story where you did the uncomfortable work of building new skills, where you created a relationship that actually functions for both people, where your partner feels valued and seen and you feel understood and accepted. Both stories are possible. But only one of them starts with you accepting responsibility for your side of the dynamic and committing to genuine change. Choose wisely.